Monetization has been a kind of touchy topic in the gaming industry. With the rise of free-to-play games with heavy monetization, a lot of us have been looking at games with heavy monetization track records and being a little careful about getting excited for them. Unfortunately, as we move closer to the future, this includes studios like Atlus and series like Persona. Monetization is really starting to creep in, and it's very noticeable. For those of you who may not know, monetization is not something that's unfamiliar to Atlus. They're no stranger to DLC. With the ever-growing fan base of games like Persona and the ports of Persona coming to PC, I think it's also important for us to understand where exactly these practices are coming in. If your first Persona game was Persona 4 Golden, you may not have noticed this, as it's a mere affordable $20 for the game, and the game has selectable costumes that you can buy without spending a single dime. However, P4 is pretty old. Looking back at the release of Persona 5, Atlus has had some questionable DLC practices since then. Though it didn't necessarily start there, it's pretty noticeable. They dropped a whole schedule with about 3 months of DLC. The content itself was ultimately pretty harmless to the overall experience, though. In the gaming community, it's pretty common to hear people say that cosmetic items are not really an issue. If the item doesn't affect gameplay, then it really doesn't matter. But it is a pretty big shift from Persona 4 Golden's unlockable outfits. The total package of DLC for Persona 5 was about $80, which is a lot. We see this trend continue to roil, with another $60 of DLC being added to the game. But I do want to make note that Persona 5 Royal coming out this fall has all the DLC packaged with it, or at least I believe that's the case. And that's awesome, and honestly a good step forward. It makes me a little less concerned about Atlus's future practices. But I think the bigger question to ask is, does this seep into other Atlus titles? And the answer is kind of. Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Soul Hackers 2 make some interesting choices with DLC. It's not uncommon for cameos to be locked behind paywalls, and I'm not surprised that it is here either. I think in the regard of DLC though, Shin Megami Tensei 5 has DLC, but it's not really super unfairly priced, and it doesn't affect the main game experience. Soul Hackers 2, however, is a little bit iffy. I want to talk about this because it's a little bit strange based on what we see being offered. So for one, the bonus story arc for this game is $10. And for the content you get, I guess it's okay. But the weird thing is that the DLC costume pack costs more than the storyline pack. Another kicker to this is that DLC costumes only show up in battle, so outside of battle, you don't get to see them at all. And if you want even more than that, the DLC Demons pack costs just as much as the costume pack. Again, these are very small changes to the gameplay being offered here. And the main kicker with the Demon pack is that it uses a lot of demons that are present in other recent release SMT games. One of those very obvious ones is Mara, who stands out like a sore thumb. It is capitalizing on your nostalgia a little bit, and you could call it a cameo, but for the most part I wouldn't call these cameos. These are just demons that have been ever present in the SMT series, now being sold to you at an increased price because there isn't enough of a legacy to go off of for Soul Hackers itself. But long story short, Atlus has been doing DLC like almost every other company has been. The why of all of this is something never directly mentioned by Atlus, but it is something that seems to be pretty relevant in the gaming industry. It's really about covering the costs of development and still being able to make a profit off of a game. As time has gone on, video games have gotten more and more expensive to make. There are the giant titans that stand on top as the most expensive video games ever created, and there are also some smaller ones, but you should always keep in mind that these things aren't cheap. While DLC isn't made for free either, it's probably a lot easier to sell smaller items packaged separately than cut out segments of a game and try to sell that separately. Even more than that, up the price of the base game. And if this is the way the industry has to make their money back, then so be it. I'd personally rather pay $60 for a game than have to pay $80 or $90. Perhaps it's becoming a bit more clear that maybe DLC alone won't cover costs of games anymore, as these things keep getting more expensive to be made. Of course, even with this justification, that doesn't absolve all DLC of being reasonable and fair. I still think it's important to scrutinize DLC along with a base game and see if, as a consumer, you think that game deserves to have that DLC. The important thing here is to scrutinize games with DLC and pay attention to to when these practices are bad. I do think a lot of Atlus games have a heavy amount of DLC that they really don't need, but if that's the case, then I just don't buy it. Whenever Atlus announces DLC for a game, I see a lot of people talk about it online. And I do agree that it is something that we should look at very closely. When you see bad practices, call them out. With Atlus right now, it's a little hard to say which direction they want to trend in. With SMT5, I felt like while there was DLC, the practice itself was getting better, and then with Soul Hackers 2, I felt like they kind of tossed all of that into the garbage bin. I want to continue to keep a watchful eye on their DLC practices so that I know what's worth buying and what's not. I hope in the future they continue to get better at the practice and control how much DLC they're actually creating. It's a little overwhelming to go into the PlayStation Store and look at any Persona game's DLC. As many people agree, I do believe that cosmetic DLC really doesn't matter. Even the extra Persona DLC isn't that big of a deal. Of course, like anyone, I wish it was included in the base game, but we can't have everything we want, unfortunately. And I'm curious, what do you guys think? Do you dislike DLC? Do you think Atlus should change their method to DLC? And what would you want it to change to? Are you okay with the current DLC practices by Atlus? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content related to Persona, Atlus, and other JRPGs as well. I've been putting out a lot of Persona stuff these past few weeks, so thank you all for sticking with me and watching this content, and I intend to put out a bit more, and I hope you'll enjoy that as well. I also hope you'll look forward to what's coming after that as well. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.